Okay, so we're doing video 2 now, and this shouldn't take that long. So, this time we're doing which policy is best, which would either be this top question or this question here. Now, they're either going to ask you, they'll either say like a policy like, is fiscal policy the best policy? Or they're going to go, which of all the policies would be best to try and improve the economy? Now, it's almost always how to improve the economy, but if instead of that, it might be which one's best to improve inflation. And they might just pick on one part of Tiger. Now, overall, I'm going to give you a kind of set answer, and you've just got to try and adapt that for the question. Right, okay, this question is all about a reduction in income tax. Is it the best way to improve the performance of the UK economy? Right, now they've put in both the short run and the long run, but who cares? Like, you're saying that anyway. It's absolutely irrelevant then putting that extra bit in. Right, so first of all, I would define some stuff. If I had to start this, now remember, you've only got maybe half an hour to do this, so there'll be pure panic. You haven't got time to think about this. A reduction in income tax, would be a fiscal policy because it's fizzy G&T. Fiscal policy is government spending and taxation. So you define fiscal policy. Right, after you've done that, you now just need to say how the performance of the UK economy is measured, just like the other question. So you talk about Tiger. Now you just do this very briefly. You don't try and go too big, but you just talk about that. Okay, once you've done that, that is your intro out the way. So I'm just going to rub out all that. You're now going to go on to the start of your question. Now, because this question is all about fiscal policy, you're doing all your answer on fiscal policy with a little bit of one of the other policies later on. Right, so I'd start off by explaining what sort of fiscal policy would improve the performance of the UK economy. So a reduction in income tax would be a expansionary fiscal policy. Now, I'd explain how this would work. So I'd say if they went for an expansionary fiscal policy by reducing the income tax, people would have a higher disposable income. So if they had a higher disposable income, they're going to spend more. You could also talk about how companies would be more confident because companies would be watching consumers spending more and they'd be more confident, so therefore they'd probably invest more. And after you've said anything like that, you then go, there'll also be a multiplier effect. Now, don't forget to talk about the multiplier effect because it's just easy marks. So you've done that so far. You've said about how an expansionary fiscal policy would work, and it would work by increasing AD. Now, this is where the question starts feeling a lot like the other question. So we've said AD is going to go up. So what we're going to do now, we are going to draw the diagram. So here's the diagram. I know I'm going to take, that's terrible. That's meant to say price level. And in our diagram, we've got AD going up. Right, so we're gonna talk about whether this is the best policy, because remember that's what the question is. Is this the best policy to improve the performance of the UK economy? Now that you said in the short run and the long run, and we're going to actually do that, and we do that anyway. So when we're deciding whether it's a good policy, we go for Tiger. Now in the other one, we are but all parts of our Tiger, but I just don't think there'll be time for that here. So first of all, I'd go for the good ones, because we're trying to say, is it the best policy? So I'd rather say the good ones first. So first of all, you can say it's good for growth because it increases short-run growth. And you'd explain what short-run growth is. You talk about how it increases. And short-run growth is when the GDP in the economy goes up, but there isn't an increase in the productive capacity of the economy. You'd also say there'd be a reduction in cyclical unemployment. Now what you'll notice here, and you'd explain what cyclical unemployment is. I'm not R-butting these ones now, like I would do normally in the previous question, because there's going to be other R-buts that I want to do. Right, now we can say, this is kind of the beginning of the R-buts, it's the kind of weak R-buts. You'd say it's bad for our trade balance because our price level has gone up, so therefore we're less competitive. And then you're also going to say that it's bad for inflation because there's going to be an increase in demand pull inflation. So the kind of big thing you're saying here is, if you use monetary policy, in the short run, it's going to have some positives, but also some negatives. So there's going to be some conflicts with the key objectives. That's a nice phrase to say there'll be some conflicts with them. Right. What you can do now is say R-buts for fiscal policies. That's what we're going to do now. Now, I've got a vague recollection that halfway through this answer I started talking about monetary policy. I might have done. Anyway, the whole point was I meant to be talking about fiscal policy. It's just currently 9:51 on a Saturday, and I've kind of lost the will to live. So if I've gone wrong, I apologise. Don't cry about it. Okay. Right. So now we're going to go on to the R buts for fiscal policy. So R buts. Now at this point in the essay, you need to have at least 2 decent R buts for fiscal policy. Now, because we've been talking about an expansionary fiscal policy, the first R but is always, we can't do an expansionary one because we're in too much debt. So debt is too high, so therefore, because we're in 1.4 trillion pounds worth of debt, I can't spell trillion, yeah, trillion pounds worth, I don't know what that is, 1.4 trillion pounds worth of debt, so therefore we can't actually do a expansionary fiscal policy. The second R but always is, what about if we were doing a contractionary monetary policy? If this was the case, then it doesn't matter that we've done an expansionary fiscal policy because it'll be counteracted. So for me, they're 2 really good R buts. Now the third R but that I want you to say now is, this question was talking about the short run versus the long run. You say actually in the long run, it might be good for all parts of AD because there might be an accelerator effect. And with the accelerator effect, this increase in AD will have caused a bigger increase, not a bigger increase, this increase in AD would have caused an increase in investment because firms need to invest to keep up with the extra demand. Now if this happens, then you could also draw this diagram with the AS line going outwards and say, look, actually this would be good for all parts of Tiger. So, actually, in the long run, monetary policy would be perfectly good for the economy. Oh, sorry, not monetary policy. Fiscal policy would be perfectly good for the economy. Right. That's the whole of the question, pretty much, for fiscal policy. Now, if you've got time, you can now arbut it a little bit with saying, well, instead of doing fiscal policy, they've got another option. Now, for me, I wouldn't bother saying monetary policy now because your answer is almost completely the same. I'd instead say another option would be to do supply-side policies. Right, and then you'd answer this in a kind of shortened version of how you normally do supply-side policies. You might quickly say what they are, you might quickly say how they work with the diagram, and then you might quickly say some R buts to them. Now after you've done that, I think there's time for a final evaluation. Now potentially for your final evaluation, you can go for whatever you want. Now you might try and go for WE steps. Now, as I've said before, with this side of the course, I'm not really a big fan of the E's in WE steps. Let's think about other ones. So for wider context, you could say, would this improvement in fiscal policy make the economy go better? Well, you can say it depends on how economies abroad might be doing. Because if they're doing badly, we won't be selling exports, so it'll actually be bad anyway. You can talk about how monetary policy might be doing something different. You can be talking about it might be only affecting certain parts of the country. But actually, I'd probably say that under scope. So under scope, you could say, oh, actually, no, keep with what I'm saying. It says a reduction in income tax. Well, you could say scope. We don't know whether this is affecting just people on high income earners or people on low income earners. You could say it depends on, it won't have any effect on people who don't work. So you could say anything there. And finally, you can prioritise your points. So you could say, I think monetary policy is perfectly good as long as you think about it in the long term, because in the short term it can cause inflation and negative parts of the economy. In the long run it'll be better. Right, if you did that, that'd be a perfectly good answer. I can't see you getting less than 20 really in that answer, I really can't. Now remember, you've always got to use the data. So if you use the data, you explain your points really well, then you're going to get full marks. Right, the next page, just very quickly, is I've said how you do a fiscal policy question, so I'm just going to change it slightly for monetary and then change it slightly for supply side. So monetary policy is going to be pretty much the exact same thing as fiscal policy. It's just got a different parts to it. So with monetary policy, you define it first of all. I'm not going to waste my time defining it. I know you know that. If you don't, you've got to have a bit of a look at yourself. There's only 3 days before the exam. Right, you then say the main things, how monetary policy, an expansionary monetary policy, would affect the economy. So you can say people would spend more using credit. You can say people will save less because there's less incentive to save because you're not getting back as much interest. You can say mortgage interest repayments would go down. This means people would have more disposable income. And finally, you can say investment by firms is going to go up because they don't have to pay as much back on loans. Right, So that's kind of the only difference now to the whole of the fiscal policy thing. The middle bit, where you draw the diagram and you say how it affects Tiger, is identical to fiscal policy, so I'm not going to waste my time doing it. What I'm going to do now, though, is just quickly some R buts for monetary policy. So the R buts for monetary policy are, your first one always is it takes 12 to 18 months to have an effect. Now, don't just say 12 to 18 months, because in the end that's like one line, and that's just going to be a weak evaluation. Give some reasons why it might take 12 to 18 months. So one reason why it might take time is banks might not follow the base rate change. They might not change their interest rate for whatever reason. And secondly, lots of people are on fixed rate mortgages. So if they're on fixed rate mortgages, a change in the base rate doesn't really affect them. Okay. The second thing you'd say after doing that one, another R but is it's the easy one. You can say, right, they might have done an expansionary monetary policy, but there might at the same time be a contractionary fiscal policy. And if there is, then it won't work because it will counteract it. Right, for me, that's pretty much the same thing. Those are two really good R buts. You don't need to go any more than that. That'll be fine. Right, finally, supply side policy. Now, you need to know your supply side policy because the question could just be on that. Now, right now, as I'm speaking, there's an advert for Poltergeist. So it's just scared me to my core. Like, horrible. Who would actually go and watch this film? Oh, God, there's a clown. It's horrible. Anyway, moving on. Right, so, supply side policies. Right, what am I chatting about? I'm completely put off now. Right, first of all, you define them. So you say supply side policies are policies that try to increase the productive capacity of the economy. You then might say that they work by being epic. Now, whatever you do in life, don't actually say they're epic, because obviously that's just the thing I've made up. No one knows what the hell you're chatting about. Supply side policies make firms more efficient. They make them more productive. They provide incentives, or some of them do, to firms to produce more. And therefore, at the end, they make them more competitive. And this is where supply side policies are different now. So after you've done that, you then say how they work. Now what they do is they make the AS line go outwards like this. AS1 and AS2. Now, just a little quick note for you. When you're drawing this diagram, don't put your AD line down here, because then when you do your dotted lines, it looks rubbish. So what? Oh God, I can't delete it now. I regret doing that now. I regret it a lot. Right. Instead of doing your AD line there, do it higher, and then it's much easier to do your dotted lines. Right. Oh, a little tip as well, make sure you do your diagrams in pen rather than pencil in the exam, because sometimes it doesn't get seen when they photocopy the piece of paper. Anyway, okay, so you said that it will make AS lines go out. You can then go through each part of Tiger. Now, as we know, with supply side policies, they're brilliant because they're good for each part of Tiger. So they're all really positive. You explain why they'd be good for each one. But now, as usual, we're at the R but stage. And the R buts for supply side policies are as follows. First of all, they take time. Now, if you say take time, I like to give education as an example. You can spend however amount of millions on a school, but it could take 7 years before that pupil goes from that, benefit from that spending on school to actually being in the economy. You can say it costs a lot of money. And this is bad because we're in those of debt. You can go back to your 1.4 trillion. If you can actually spell trillion, which I'm not convinced I can at the minute. Maybe I can. And then you can always just say, takes time, costs a lot, doesn't always work. So they might spend all that money on supply side policies and they don't always work. Now I've got a new R but for supply side policies. I quite like it. And I like it using it from this diagram. Now this diagram comes up sometimes in the multiple choice where they say if AD goes up from here to here and there's big supply side policies which makes the AS line go out like that or the PPF to go out like that, why is that actually bad for the economy? And it's bad because before there was this negative output gap and now there's a much bigger negative output gap. So one of the big R buts for supply side policies is it's all well and good increasing the productive capacity of the economy, but you have to make sure you use expansionary demand side policies to actually make sure demand keeps on going with supply. So it needs to be done in conjunction with. And that can always be a grand finale of your essay. supply side policies are all very, very well and good, but you need to make sure you use expansionary demand side policies to keep up. And there we are. I think that is a pretty good explanation of how to do this sort of 25 marker. Good luck with it all. Now, I'd watch these 2 videos, plus the video on how to do the 12 marker before the exam on Tuesday, and good luck with it all.